Hello, I'm Sebastian. Welcome to 9 Trees podcast. Today, I will summarize and review the book. Narrative and Numbers by Aswath Damodaran explores a persistent tension in business decision-making. Leaders need compelling stories to make sense of uncertainty, but they also need disciplined analysis to avoid being misled by hype. Written by a globally known valuation professor, the book argues that narrative and numbers are not rivals but complements. A persuasive narrative frames what a business is, why it can win, and how it will create value. Rigorous numbers test that narrative through assumptions, forecasts, and valuation tools that reveal what must be true for the story to hold. Damodaran focuses on practical business contexts, especially investing, corporate strategy, and entrepreneurship, where ambitious claims can travel faster than evidence. He shows how to build narratives that are coherent and specific, translate them into financial models, and then stress test them with data and common sense. The result is a guide for making better judgments when facing uncertain markets, new technologies, and high-growth promises. I will give you key takeaways from this book. Firstly, why narratives drive business decisions. The book starts from a simple reality. People do not experience businesses as spreadsheets. They experience them as explanations about products, customers, competition, and future potential. Damodaran treats narrative as the first step in understanding a company, because every forecast already embeds a story about how the firm will evolve. A good business narrative clarifies the problem being solved, the size and nature of the market, the edge that allows the company to compete, and the path from idea to scalable operations. It also defines the key uncertainties, including adoption rates, pricing power, regulatory limits, and competitive responses. The value of a narrative is that it forces focus. It says what matters and what does not, and it creates a causal chain that can later be checked. Damodaran also highlights the risk. Narratives can become marketing, built to persuade rather than to explain. When stories rely on vague superlatives, ignore constraints, or shift whenever facts change, they stop being tools for thinking. The discipline is to craft narratives that are specific enough to be measurable and humble enough to admit what is unknown. Secondly, turning a story into assumptions you can model. A central contribution of the book is a method for translating narrative into numbers without killing the insight that the narrative provides. Damodaran emphasizes that valuation and forecasting are not about producing a single correct figure, but about making assumptions explicit. The narrative must be decomposed into drivers that show up in financial statements, revenue growth, operating margins, reinvestment needs, capital efficiency, and risk. For example, a story about network effects needs assumptions about user growth, monetization, and churn. A story about premium branding needs assumptions about pricing, gross margins, and marketing spend. This translation process exposes gaps. If the story claims dominance but cannot justify how margins expand or why reinvestment falls, the narrative is incomplete. Damodaran also stresses internal consistency. High growth usually requires substantial reinvestment, and rapid scaling can pressure margins before it improves them. By mapping narrative claims to measurable inputs, the reader gains a structured way to test plausibility and to compare competing stories about the same company. The model becomes a mirror that reflects the story back with consequences, making disagreements concrete rather than rhetorical. Thirdly, valuation as a tool for skepticism and clarity. Damodaran frames valuation as the discipline that keeps narratives honest. The goal is not to replace judgment with math, but to ensure that judgment is accountable. In this view, valuation is a framework for asking, what must be true for this business to be worth the price being paid today? The book highlights how different narratives imply very different distributions of outcomes, especially for young or disruptive firms. When the market price assumes extraordinary growth, sustained high margins, and limited competition, the valuation process makes those assumptions visible and challengeable. Damodaran is known for focusing on discounted cash flow logic and the drivers of value, and the narrative approach fits naturally with that focus. Cash flows, growth duration, reinvestment, and risk are the numerical counterparts to strategic claims. The book also encourages readers to separate story disagreement from arithmetic disagreement. Two people can share the same model structure yet diverge because they believe different adoption curves or competitive dynamics. By doing valuation with narrative discipline, managers and investors can communicate disagreements clearly, update beliefs with new evidence, and avoid getting anchored to a single seductive number. Fourthly, common storytelling traps in markets and management. A major theme is that stories can mislead in predictable ways. Damodaran examines how business narratives become exaggerated through incentives, social proof, and the desire for simple explanations. Companies, founders, bankers, and analysts may highlight best-case outcomes, downplay constraints, or use fashionable labels that feel explanatory but carry little analytical content. The book warns against narratives that rely on total addressable market figures without credible paths to capture and monetize that market. It also cautions against stories that treat competition as an afterthought or assume that scale automatically produces defensible advantage. Another trap is narrative drift, where the story changes as results disappoint, while the valuation or investment thesis is defended with moving goalposts. Damodaran argues for identifying the core narrative drivers early, then tracking the few metrics that truly validate or invalidate the story. He also stresses base rates and historical context. Some business models rarely produce durable excess returns, and some industries systematically attract competitors that compress margins. These checks do not eliminate creativity. They keep creativity tethered to reality. The practical outcome is better risk awareness and fewer decisions based on wishful thinking. Lastly, using narrative plus numbers in leadership and communication beyond investing, the book applies the narrative and numbers approach to leadership communication and strategic planning. Leaders must tell stories that mobilize teams, attract customers, and persuade investors, but those stories must be backed by plans that allocate resources and measure progress. Damodaran implies a healthy cycle. Start with a narrative that sets direction, build a model that translates direction into targets and trade-offs, then revise the narrative as evidence accumulates. This approach improves internal decision-making because it forces clarity about priorities. If the narrative is about rapid growth, the numbers must reflect investments in hiring, infrastructure, and customer acquisition, along with expected payback. If the narrative is about resilience, the numbers must incorporate balance sheet strength, operating flexibility, and downside scenarios. The book also helps readers communicate more credibly. When you can connect strategic statements to measurable drivers, audiences can see you are not selling a dream, but managing a set of accountable hypotheses. Over time, this raises trust and reduces confusion because updates are framed as learning rather than as spin. The combined method is especially useful in volatile markets where confidence must be balanced with realism. In conclusion, this book is best for investors, entrepreneurs, managers, MBA students, and anyone who must evaluate ambitious business claims under uncertainty. Readers who are comfortable with spreadsheets but struggle to articulate the strategic story will learn how narrative provides structure and meaning. Readers who love storytelling but feel uneasy with finance will learn how numbers can protect them from persuasive but fragile arguments. The benefit to life and work is practical. You become better at separating hope from evidence, identifying the few assumptions that truly drive outcomes, and making decisions that can be updated as facts change. That skill applies to investing, career choices, product bets, and negotiations, because all involve competing narratives about the future. Compared with similar business books that focus only on qualitative strategy or only on technical valuation, narrative and numbers stands out by insisting that the two must connect. It offers a disciplined way to translate big ideas into measurable drivers and then stress test them. That integration makes the book worth buying for readers who want a repeatable framework rather than inspirational stories or abstract formulas. If you want to build arguments that are both compelling and accountable, this is a rare guide that treats persuasion and precision as partners. If you would like to support Aswath Damodaran, you can buy the book through the Amazon link I've provided in the podcast description. After reading the book, please let me know what you think and share your thoughts. See you around.